Hello and welcome to another edition of Plain Talk here on Eagle Eye TV. I'm your host, Ken Ward, and today we're joined by Heather Milam, who is the Democratic nominee for Alabama Secretary of State. Thank you so much, Ms. Milam, for joining us.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. And War Eagle.
War Eagle as well. You're an Auburn graduate.
I am.
Could you talk a little bit about your background and why you've decided to run for Secretary of State this year?
Sure. Well, here on Auburn's campus, I ended up getting 2 degrees, one in public relations over in Tishner Hall, and the other being Spanish, foreign language, so I spent a lot of time in the Haley Center as well. But I pursued a career in publishing and in management, went on to get a graduate degree in public and private management, and ended up owning a newspaper for several years, and I got to see a lot of reporting and some of what was going on in the political world here in Alabama, and it really shed light on problems that we have here in the state and opportunities. But also being a lifelong Alabamian, I care deeply about my state. In fact, I jokingly sometimes say I'm madly in love with this state, but I truly am, and I want her to be the best she can be. And you know, I always thought that I might go into some type of public service, and certainly November of 2016, I think, expedited a lot of individuals' desires, especially women, to seek a public office, because we thought, you know what, it's time for the government to work for the people. And I thought, well, if not now, then when? And if not me, then who? So I got into the game, and I declared my candidacy about a year ago, roughly. Feels like a year, maybe a little less than a year, back early in 2018 for the Democratic candidate for Secretary of State.
A lot of people that might be watching might not know exactly what the Secretary of State does. They might just think about it in voter registration or something like that. Could you talk a little bit about how you would use your background in publishing and bring that to the Secretary of State's office if elected?
Sure. So the Secretary of State office has a lot of responsibilities and duties. But one of the ways I explain the office is that it's the largest filing cabinet for the state of Alabama. So all of our documents and paperwork, laws, bills, it's all housed in the Secretary's office. Also, if you apply for a business license, that goes through our office. If you apply for a nonprofit status, that goes through our office. The Secretary of State is the official notary for the state of Alabama, so when the governor signs a bill into law, the Secretary of State is there to notarize it. But what most people understand Secretaries of State to do is manage the elections and registration of voters. And so that is a very important job and role for any state. And I'm deeply concerned about, you know, voter empowerment. Alabama ranks 46th in voter participation. We're one of only 13 states that has no form of early voting. And as a student, I'm sure you know, sometimes it's really difficult to understand the voting process. How do I get registered? Where do I register? That problem could be eliminated if we had automatic voter registration, or almost eliminated, right? As a student also, you're very busy. You have, many of you have jobs, multiple jobs. You're in class full time. If you are, you know, a professional that's working 12-hour shifts, like a nurse or in a factory or anything that keeps you busy all day long, sometimes it's hard to get to a precinct in that very short 12-hour window on a Tuesday. Early voting would help with that. But anyway, so there's a lot that we can do in within the Secretary's office, and I'm going to be pushing for policies like automatic voter registration and early voting, because I think we need to work on voter empowerment, which is something that the current Secretary of State is not doing.
In regards to the automatic voter registration, how do you see that as being implemented? I know some states have been toying with that idea. I believe California has toyed with that idea before. How do you see that possibly being implemented here in Alabama?
Yeah, many states have some type of automatic voter registration. And I think that it's going to take a lot of work with the legislature. I know it's going to take work with the legislature. So there has to be an open line of communication, not only with them in Montgomery, but also with all 67 counties and local governments across the state. Early 2000s, we did the motor voter laws, right? So if you go and update your driver's license, you can update your voter information, your voting information, your new address that is tied to your voter registration. And we would use a similar system to help manage that. So if you're 16 years old and you register for a driver's license at the DMV at 18 years old, that system would talk and say, oh, now he's 18 and he's automatically registered to vote. Also, Last year, we had the governor, Kay Ivey, who signed into law the definition of crimes of moral turpitude. And the reason I'm mentioning that within the context of this question is because at that time, tens of thousands of former felons immediately gained their right to vote. Many didn't know that, and still the Southern Poverty Law Center estimates somewhere around 130,000 Alabamians who have that right but may not know it, or may not know how to register to vote or go through that process. And automatic voter registration or some policy in that realm would help them gain their right without having to go through a complicated process that they may not otherwise know about.
In what ways would y'all work with the automatic voter registration in order to make sure there's no fraud or anything? I saw a recent report by a nonprofit think tank out of DC that said there are roughly a little over 1,000 cases of voter fraud in the United States over the past several years. Could you talk a little bit about how we'd make sure that that does not happen in Alabama?
So many of the studies that I've seen have indicated that out of even up to 1 billion votes that have been cast from 2000 to I think 2017, that there were only 31 cases of verified voter impersonation fraud, which statistically is non-existent, right? It's such an outlier and the number is just so low that it's virtually non-existent. Voter fraud, when it happens, is a serious issue, but I think the bigger problem we have here in Alabama is the lack of participation. In the primary election here in June of 2018, only 25% of voters participated, which means that 75% of voters' voices were not heard. That to me is a big problem. If we are ranking 46th in voter participation, and on a good election cycle, only 59% of voters exercise their right to vote, we're still missing over 40% of Alabamians' voices at the polls. And so that is a serious issue that I am deeply concerned with, which again is one of the reasons I'm running on a platform of voter empowerment. You know, not only do we need to register people to vote and continue that effort with all of the grassroots efforts that are out there throughout the state of Alabama, here on college campuses, out at festivals and so on, we also have to allow these individuals access to their right to vote. So rather than closing DMVs, we need to be opening up places for people to vote. Polling places on college campuses, polling places on high school campuses. Early voting, again, as I said, I spoke to a young man at a football game recently in North Alabama who was from North Carolina. He'd come in for the game, and he says that he votes whenever it's time for an election. He will go the Sunday before the election, right after church, to his library, and he casts his ballot there. And it's easy, and he's able to take friends of his from church if they want to go with him. It's just a process that has become sort of a tradition for him, and we can do that here in Alabama.
Thank you so much. We're right now joined with Heather Milam, who's the Democratic nominee for Secretary of State, here on Plain Talk. We'll be right back after a brief commercial break. Join us in just a moment.
I believe this is a practical world and that I can count only on what I earn. Therefore, I believe in work, hard work.
I believe in education, which gives me the knowledge to work wisely and trains my mind and my hands to work skillfully.
I believe in honesty and truthfulness, without which I cannot win the respect and confidence of my fellow men.
I believe in a sound mind, in a sound body, in a spirit that is not afraid, and in a clean sport that develops these qualities.
I believe in obedience to the law because it protects the rights of all.
I believe in human touch, which cultivates sympathy with my fellow men and mutual helpfulness and brings happiness for all.
I believe in my country because it is a land of freedom and because it is my home, and that I can best serve that country by doing justly, loving mercy, and walking humbly with my God.
And because Auburn men and women believe in these things, I believe in Auburn and love it.
Welcome back to Plain Talk here on Eagle Eye TV. I'm your host, Ken Ward, and right now we're joined with Heather Milam, who's the Democratic nominee for Secretary of State here in Alabama. Thank you so much, Ms. Milam, for joining us.
Thank you again.
Before the break, we were talking a little bit about voter registration and things of that nature. Now, another big part of the Secretary of State's office is business filings and things of that nature. In what ways would you like to implement some changes possibly in the way the office handles some of those?
That's a good question. So one of the things that I'd like to see the Secretary of State office become is more of a resource for the citizens of Alabama. Rather than being an office that just rubber stamps documents that come through, how can we be more of a resource for those who are opening small businesses throughout the state of Alabama. You know, my opponent has cut his staff something around 25%. You know, were those individuals fired? Did they quit? Were their jobs eliminated? Or some combination of both? Did it create a quagmire of sort of the policies there within the Office of the Secretary of State? I want to see that. I'd like to look at the budget to see how we manage that. But again, making sure that this office, which belongs to the people of Alabama, is there as the resource that it should be, and that we're working for the citizens of Alabama. And like I said, rather than being a rubber stamp office, I want to be a true asset to those who need assistance and help and have questions.
As we know, Alabama is probably one of the most Republican states in the union. So as a Democrat, any Democrat running statewide is always faced with a few challenges in that regard. If elected, how would you work with some of your Republican counterparts that might be in other positions in the government to try to get some of these platform positions accomplished?
That too is a very good question. So I might push back a little bit on the assertion there that we tend to be a red state, as in we do have a supermajority in the legislature in Montgomery. All of the statewide offices are currently held by Republicans. But you know, last year when we elected and we worked to elect our Democratic Senator Doug Jones, I think it truly showed the capacity of our state and what we really are as a state. And in fact, we're purple. And I think what this year shows is that we have real choices in candidates. And so many first-timers this year are Democratic candidates. Many of us are women. And we are running not to take money from corporations and serve them. We are working for the people of Alabama. And I think that the citizens of Alabama will respond to that. We are starved for authentic candidates and people who simply do want to go to Montgomery and do the job that voters are hiring them to do. And we have candidates from which to choose this year, and it's refreshing, it's exciting, it's energetic, and truly the hope is on our side in that we are bringing reality and truth to Montgomery. And with that, I think the narrative is going to have to be, you know, we're coming into Montgomery and we want the government to function, so let's sit down at a table and figure out a way in which to make that work. You cannot have a democracy without voting, and you cannot have a true democracy without dialogue and discourse. And I hope, and I will certainly assume that that is going to happen, and that's what I'll work toward. Because again, the government isn't the candidates that get elected. The government is you, and the government is me. And we need to make sure that not only those that we vote into these offices really realize that, but also that they act upon that and that they're serving their citizens. And I think this year is it's a watershed moment for us, not only in Alabama, but nationally. And I think we're going to see some real change and hopeful change.
You did emphasize the fact that you're a first-time candidate, and what do you believe that will bring as to the office in regards to giving you an advantage? I know your current opponent has been in politics for a while now.
Yeah.
What do you think that coming in as an outsider will bring to the office?
Well, the old cliche, right? I mean, an outsider's point of view. It's always sort of a refreshing bit of energy that you can inject into a situation, and often people will pay for that type of consulting, like come in and help us understand what's going on. We're swimming in this fishbowl. But also I think it's just real transparency and authenticity. Again, we are starved for that type of candidate in Montgomery, and we'll just focus on Alabama because that's what we're talking about and that's where we are, but you're seeing it on a national stage too. And so I think I bring with it a lack of corruption, a commitment to the citizens. You know, again, make sure that we're watching who is funding these campaigns for candidates. I think that's very important. When you look at some of my fellow candidates, that's exactly what we are paying attention to, is making sure that we have no influence on, we're not being influenced by anybody other than the voters and the people that we hope to serve, you know, for the next 2, 4, 6 years, 8 years, as it may be. And many of us too, running this year, including myself, don't have aspirations of being, you know, a political candidate for the next 4 decades. We simply want Montgomery to work and work for us and you, me, all of us. And we're fed up. It's just time. It's time for a change. And we kind of joke, all of us across the state, and there's so many people who are active and working and out canvassing and phone banking. And one of the jokes that we say is that we can't unknow what we know. And we can't unsee what we've seen. And we've seen too much of the bad part of Montgomery, and we've seen too much of the corruption, and we've seen too much of the corporate money that has been injected into our government, and it's weaponized our government to work against the citizens of Alabama. And we can't unsee that, and we can't unknow that. And I think that we're really focused on making sure that we clean that up in Montgomery because we deserve better, right? Alabama ranks last in virtually every survey in our qualities of life. I mean, we rank first at this point in infant mortality. We rival third world countries, right? We need to fix that. That is absolutely unacceptable. Hospitals are closing all across the state because we chose politics over lives and we didn't expand Medicaid. We rank 46th in voter participation. That all needs to change. We need to be empowering voters. We need people participating in their government. And it's easy for me to go on a rant because I get really passionate about it. But you know, I just think it's a watershed year and we have real hope. It's exciting.
You're talking about trying to fight corruption in Montgomery. Over the past 4 years, we've seen a governor, a chief justice, and a speaker of the House all removed over corruption-related issues or mishandling their oaths of office. Could you talk a little bit about how you would use your resources if elected, especially on the campaign finance side, since that's what the Secretary of State manages a lot of in working to try to fight political corruption in Alabama?
Yeah, well, again, I think that we are going to have a legislature that is willing to work, right, for Alabamians and institute policy and law that will limit the amount of money that can be injected into certain campaigns. We've got to eliminate this dark money that goes into campaigns either from outside the state or even from inside the state. We need to be able to track money more efficiently. And so there's a lot of things that we can do. In fact, that's one of the things that I didn't mention earlier with the Secretary of State office. All of our campaign financing goes into, or is run and managed in that office, the documentation of it. And so if any of your viewers right now are curious, you can go see money that is given to every candidate out there and where it's coming from. But with that said, some of the sources are a bit nefarious because they're funneled through PACs, and you don't know who's giving to the PAC or who gave to the PAC and it's funneled to the candidate. So there's just a lot of room for improvement. But again, I can't do it just as the Secretary of State. We're going to have a dynamic office staff once I'm there, and I'm very excited about that. There are good people in that office right now, and they are working tirelessly all the time. But we need to undergird them with additional strength and good leadership, but that also takes the legislature of Montgomery too. So.
Your opponent is current Secretary of State John Merrill, who before that served in the state legislature for a few years. In what ways do you plan on trying to set yourself apart over the next few weeks before the November election from Secretary Merrill and the way he's run the office?
Well, we only have 3 weeks, exactly 3 weeks from today. I hope all of your viewers have a plan to get out and vote and make sure they take friends with them. And the last day to register to vote is Monday, October 22nd, just as a public service reminder. But at this point, you know, it's just continuing what we've been doing. We have been working tirelessly. I've been very proud of not only myself, but my team. We have worked 14-hour days nonstop for the last several months. We have been visiting some of the most beautiful places in Alabama, some places that I've never had the opportunity to go to. We are asking people for their vote. We are trying to make as much voter contact as possible because, again, it's all about the citizens of Alabama. So we have been spending our time at picnics, at rallies, at festivals, phone banking, canvassing, call timing, just doing all this stuff where we have direct voter contact because that's what it takes, you know? And so that's what we're going to continue to do, what we've been doing so far. And we have met a lot of people so far. And like I said, I am extremely hopeful. And it really will come down to the day of election. And it's all about voter turnout. And so from 3 weeks, you know, on, 2 weeks, 1 week, it's all about get out the vote. We have to get as many people to the polls as possible. And so we'll be focused on that. But it's not going to change our entire method and strategy that we've implemented thus far. So we'll continue to do a lot of the same.
And then I guess my final question is, you did say that really what influenced you to vote was the November 2016 election. And you said a lot of fellow female candidates are running. We see that in a lot of the congressional races, of course, throughout the country. Could you talk about what it feels like to be a first-time female running for office here in Alabama?
Sure, and I think you said what led us to vote, but it's what led us to run for office. So it's been an eye-opening experience. Some of the numbers, just to help sort of contextualize what we're dealing with. Only 15%, 14 or 15% of the legislature in Montgomery is female, which means 75+% of the decision makers about bills and policies are male. If you look across the statewide office with the Supreme Court and the judges that sit on that and the statewide offices, you essentially have Kay Ivey as the female, right? When you look at fundraising disparities, there's a big delineation between what women can raise and what men can raise, right? These are just numbers that you can't dispute. Those are just out there. And so I think that we've not ever had really strong female leadership here in the state of Alabama, with the exception of 2 or 3, but they need our help. There are some wonderful women who are serving Alabama, one of them being my own representative. She's stepping down, but and I hate that, but we'll get a new representative in her place, and he's going to be a great one. I think that the real challenge is making sure that we continue pushing for that equity and the equality. I mean, there is disparity between men and women in Alabama, and you can't deny that, whether it's in pay or in our political representation. And I'm just inspired by so many of us who said, you know what? We haven't been in the political world before. Many of us have volunteered for campaigns. I've volunteered for many campaigns, including the special Senate election last year and some of the municipal elections in Birmingham. But we just said, you know what? We can do this. And we're relying on one another for support. One of the great organizations that's now in Alabama, I have to brag on a little bit because I'm a graduate, is Emerge Alabama. This is a Democratic grassroots organization that started in California. Alabama has a chapter or an affiliate, excuse me, and in its first year alone, we started in the beginning of 2018, its first year alone, we've had 2 cohorts, almost 39 women. 39 Democratic women have trained or won for office, and I think 23 of them are currently in races across the state. That's powerful, and that organization isn't going anywhere. And so as we continue this narrative and we build that pipeline and we continue to sort of build the threshold or elevate that threshold of where we are, we're only going to see more and more women participating in the political structure, and that is so inspirational. And I'm just proud to be a part of it.
Well, thank you so much, Heather Milam, for joining us here on Plain Talk today, and thank you for watching. Join us each week for an in-depth conversation with the mover and shaker in this community, in this state, or in this nation. Thank you so much, and have a great rest of your week.